A life of glittering perfection can shatter in a heartbeat. For Serena Thorne, that heartbeat was the one she shared with her unborn child. She was the pregnant wife of millionaire industrialist Julian Thorne, living a fairy tale on Park Avenue. Her best friend Seraphina was always by her side. But one devastating night, the fairy tale became a nightmare. Betrayed, cast out, and left with nothing, Serena was just another broken soul in the sprawling city. Little did her cruel husband know, the child he disowned was not his. 9 months later, she would give birth not to a millionaire's son, but to the sole heir of a silent kingmaker, a billionaire whose power could crush empires with a single phone call. This is the story of how a woman's ruin became her greatest victory. The chandeliers of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Grand Hall dripped crystal light onto New York City's elite. It was the annual Thorne Industries Benevolence Gala, the crowning social event of the season, and at its center were Julian and Serena Thorne. To the outside world, they were perfection personified. Julian, with his sharp, custom-tailored Tom Ford suit and a smile that could disarm senators, was the self-made titan, his tech empire, a testament to his ruthless ambition. Serena, draped in a bespoke Valentino gown that shimmered like liquid moonlight, was the picture of aristocratic grace, her hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her 5-month pregnancy. Her family, the Sterlings, were old money, their influence woven into the very fabric of the city's history. The marriage had been hailed as a merger of legacy and innovation, a perfect union. Serena had believed it too. She had loved Julian's drive, his intensity, the way he seemed to conquer the world, and then come home to her. "You look radiant, darling," Julian murmured, his hand finding hers. But his touch was cool, his eyes already scanning the room, assessing, networking, forever closing the next deal. "Ambassador Thompson is here. I need to have a word." He gave her hand a perfunctory squeeze and was gone, swallowed by a sea of tuxedos and jewels. A familiar pang of loneliness echoed in Serena's chest, a feeling she had grown adept at ignoring. She smoothed the silk over her belly, whispering to the tiny life within. This baby, their son, would change everything. He would bridge the growing distance between them, anchor Julian, and make their perfect picture a perfect reality. He's a force of nature, isn't he? A voice purred beside her. Seraphina Vance, her best friend since their days at Vassar, slid her arm through Serena's. Seraphina was fire to Serena's ice, all sharp angles, fiery red hair, and a wicked, knowing smile. She was the one Serena confided in, the one who understood the unique pressures of their gilded cage. "He's just busy," Serena replied, forcing a smile. "The merger with Omnicorp is taking everything out of him." "Of course it is," Seraphina said, her eyes following Julian. There was an intensity in her gaze that Serena mistook for vicarious pride. "But don't you worry. Once your little prince arrives, that man won't know what hit him. He'll be wrapped around your little finger." Seraphina was always saying the right thing. Yet lately, a strange discordance had begun to surface. A shared glance with Julian that lasted a fraction of a second too long. A whispered conversation that would abruptly halt the moment Serena entered a room. An inside joke between them that Serena wasn't privy to. She dismissed it all as paranoia, the anxieties of pregnancy. Seraphina was her sister in all but blood. Julian was her husband. To doubt them was to doubt the very foundation of her world. Later that evening, a wave of dizziness washed over Serena. The press of the crowd, the cloying scent of 1,000 perfumes, and the relentless flash of cameras suddenly felt suffocating. She found Julian speaking with a group of investors, Seraphina laughing at his side. "Julian, "I'm not feeling well," she said, touching his arm. "I think I need to go home." He turned his annoyance, a fleeting shadow in his eyes, before the mask of concern slipped into place. "Of course, my love." "Is it the baby? I'm just tired. I'll take the car. You should stay. It's your night." "Nonsense, I'll have Seraphina go with you," he said, a little too quickly. "She can make sure you're settled in." "No, really," Serena insisted. "I just want to lie down. I'll be fine. Please stay." Seraphina placed a perfectly manicured hand on Serena's shoulder. "Are you sure, honey, I don't mind at all?" Her eyes were wide with feigned concern, but something cold flickered behind them. "I'm sure," Serena said, managing a weak smile. "I'll see you both later." The drive back to their Park Avenue penthouse was a blur. The familiar comfort of their home, a sprawling duplex designed by a famed architect, did little to soothe her unease. The silence of the apartment felt vast and empty. She changed into a silk robe, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation, and tried to quell the strange anxiety knotting her stomach. An hour passed, then another. She must have dozed off on the chaise lounge in their bedroom. She was woken by the sound of the front door opening, followed by soft laughter. It was Julian and Seraphina. Relief washed over her. Julian hadn't stayed at the party too long after all. She stood up, ready to greet them, but froze when she heard Seraphina's voice, stripped of its usual warmth and laced with something sharp and possessive. "Did you see her face, Jules? So pale and pathetic." "I'm not feeling well," she mimicked in a childish whining tone. Julian's deep chuckle was a dagger to Serena's heart. It was the perfect excuse. She's so wrapped up in that baby she can't see what's right in front of her. And what's that? Seraphina's voice was closer now, husky and intimate. "This," Julian murmured. The sound that followed was unmistakable, a soft, wet kiss that spoke of familiarity and passion. Serena's blood ran cold. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her mind refused to process the sounds coming from her own living room. The rustle of expensive fabric, a throaty moan from her best friend, the deep sigh of contentment from her husband. Rooted to the spot by a horror too profound to comprehend, Serena listened as the two people she trusted most in the world dismantled her life piece by sordid piece. The perfect illusion didn't just crack, it exploded, leaving her in the silent, screaming rubble. Time seemed to warp and stretch. Each second was an eternity filled with the sounds of betrayal. Serena felt as if she were floating outside her own body, a ghost in her own home. Her hand, trembling, went to her stomach, a desperate, instinctual need to protect the only innocent thing left in her life. That small movement broke the paralysis. A silent tear traced a path down her cheek, then another. The dam of her disbelief broke, and a tidal wave of pain and rage surged through her. She walked out of the bedroom. The scene in the living room was worse than her imagination had conjured. Julian had Seraphina pinned against the grand floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights framing their passionate embrace. Seraphina's red dress was unzipped, her head thrown back in ecstasy. They didn't see Serena at first. They were in their own world, a world built on her trust and their deceit. A small, strangled sound escaped Serena's throat. Their heads snapped towards her. For a moment, there was a flicker of shock in Julian's eyes, a flash of panic on Seraphina's face, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Seraphina slowly, deliberately straightened her dress, her lips curled into a smug, triumphant smirk. Julian simply stared at Serena, his expression hardening from surprise into something cold and utterly devoid of remorse. "Serena," he said, his voice flat, as if she were a minor inconvenience. You were supposed to be asleep. The sheer audacity of his calmness stole her breath. How could you? She whispered the words, tearing at her raw throat. She looked at Seraphina, the woman who had held her hand during morning sickness, who had helped her pick out colours for the nursery. And you? My best friend, Seraphina, laughed a short, ugly sound. Oh, sweetie, did you really think this was a friendship? It was a strategy? You were a stepping stone. A very naive, very boring stepping stone. Every word was a physical blow. Serena staggered back, clutching the doorframe for support. Julian, please. She begged, turning to her husband, searching for a sign, any sign of the man she thought she knew. Our baby. Let's be honest. Serena Julian said, stepping away from Seraphina and walking towards the marble-topped bar. He poured himself a whiskey, his movements casual, unhurried. This marriage was never about love. It was a merger. Sterling prestige and Thorne ambition. It served its purpose. Now I'm moving on. Moving on, she echoed her voice, trembling with disbelief. I am carrying your child. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes like chips of ice. Are you? You've been so fragile lately, so emotional. Who's to say you didn't seek comfort elsewhere during one of my many business trips? The timing is convenient, I'll admit. The accusation was so vile, so far beyond the pale, that it momentarily silenced her pain with sheer shock. He was not only discarding her, he was trying to shatter her reputation, to taint the one pure thing she had left. That's a lie, she said, her voice finding a sliver of strength. You know that's a lie. It's my word against yours, he said with a shrug. And in this city, my word carries a bit more weight. He walked over to a leather briefcase on the mahogany desk and pulled out a sheaf of papers. He tossed them onto the coffee table. Divorce papers, already drawn up. My lawyers are very efficient. Her eyes fell on the documents. Her name was printed next to his, a cold legal declaration of the end of her world. The terms are generous, considering he continued his tone all business. A one-time payment enough to keep you comfortable for a year or two. In exchange, you sign a comprehensive, non-disclosure agreement. You will never speak of me, Seraphina, or our marriage publicly. You will vacate this penthouse by noon tomorrow. Your credit cards have already been deactivated. I've had your personal belongings packed and sent to a storage unit. The key is in the envelope. It was a systematic execution of her life. He had planned this. Every detail, every cruelty had been carefully orchestrated. You're throwing me out. She gasped, the reality of it finally sinking in. I have nowhere to go. That sounds like a personal problem, not a financial one, he said, finishing his whiskey. He looked at Seraphina, a genuine smile finally gracing his lips. Sarah and I are going to be announcing our engagement next month after the Omnicorp deal is finalized. A messy, pregnant ex-wife would be a public relations nightmare. Serena felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She looked from her husband's merciless face to her former friend's victorious sneer. There was no remorse, no pity, only cold, hard ambition. They had won. They had taken everything. With a final surge of defiance, she looked Julian straight in the eye. You will regret this. He actually laughed. I doubt it. Security will show you out. He gestured to the door, a final dismissive flick of his hand. As two stone-faced men in suits entered the room, Serena clutched her small purse, the only thing she had left, and walked out of the life she knew. The last thing she saw was Seraphina sliding into Julian's arms, whispering something in his ear as she looked over his shoulder at Serena, her eyes gleaming with malice. The heavy penthouse door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoing the final brutal closing of a chapter, leaving Serena Thorne pregnant, betrayed, and utterly alone on the cold, unforgiving streets of New York. The fall was swift and brutal. One moment, Serena was the mistress of a Park Avenue palace. The next, she was a ghost, haunting the city that had once worshipped her. The settlement Julian offered was a pittance deliberately calculated to be just enough to silence her, but not enough to sustain her. Her sterling family trust was locked away, inaccessible, until her 30th birthday, a technicality Julian's lawyers had gleefully exploited. Her society friends vanished overnight, their loyalties as fickle as the stock market. Calls went unanswered. Invitations ceased. It was as if Serena Thorne had simply ceased to exist. After a few humiliating nights in a sterile midtown hotel, she found a small second-floor walk-up in Brooklyn with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. The contrast to her former life was a daily visceral shock. The scent of her neighbor's cooking replaced the subtle fragrance of fresh-cut flowers. The wail of sirens replaced the gentle hum of the city from 40 floors up. She sold the last of her valuable possessions, a Cartier watch, diamond earrings Julian had given her for their first anniversary, to pay the security deposit and buy groceries. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her as she counted out crumpled bills at the local market. It was during those long, lonely nights with the city's symphony of survival playing outside her window that Julian's cruelest words returned to haunt her. Who's to say you didn't seek comfort elsewhere? The accusation had been a lie, a tool to wound her. And yet it had dislodged a memory she had carefully tucked away, a single night of warmth in a long, cold year. It had been 8 months ago. Julian was on a 3-week business trip through Asia, a trip he had extended twice. His calls were brief, perfunctory. Serena was rattling around their cavernous penthouse, feeling more like a beautiful piece of furniture than a wife. To escape the oppressive silence, she had decided to attend a charity art auction at a private gallery in Chelsea, an event her mother's foundation was sponsoring. She had gone alone, feeling invisible, in a room full of people she'd known for years. As she stood before a mesmerizing Mark Rothko painting, lost in its deep emotional color fields, a quiet voice spoke beside her. It pulls you in, doesn't it? The void. It's either terrifying or comforting, depending on the day. She turned to see a man who did not fit the glossy, predictable mold of the city's elite. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes that held a hint of melancholy. His silver-streaked hair was slightly unruly, and his suit, though impeccably tailored, was worn with an air of complete indifference. He had an aura of quiet power, a stillness that commanded more attention than the boisterous laughter of the hedge fund managers nearby. She didn't recognize him, which in their circle was a rarity. I was thinking it looked peaceful, Serena had replied, surprised by her own honesty. He smiled a genuine, gentle expression. I'm Caspian. He didn't offer a last name. Serena. She didn't offer one either. For that one night she didn't want to be Serena Thorne, wife of the tech mogul. She just wanted to be Serena. They spent the next 2 hours talking, not about business or society gossip, but about art, about travel, about the books that had shaped them. Caspian spoke with a passion and depth she found intoxicating. He listened to her, truly listened in a way Julian never had. He saw the sadness she kept hidden behind her society smile and spoke to it not with pity, but with a quiet understanding. He spoke of his late wife, a painter, with such love and reverence that it brought tears to Serena's eyes. There was an undeniable connection, an intellectual and emotional spark that crackled in the space between them. When the auction ended, he walked her out into the cool night air. It was a pleasure meeting you, Serena. he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "And you, Caspian?" A taxi pulled up. Neither of them wanted the night to end. The words were unspoken, but the sentiment hung in the air, potent and real. On a silent, mutual impulse, he gave the driver the address of a quiet, elegant hotel in Soho. Their night together was not a torrid, thoughtless affair. It was a moment of profound connection, a gentle collision of two lonely souls. It was filled with conversation, with tenderness, with the simple human need to be seen and valued. In the morning, they parted with a quiet, respectful understanding. It was a beautiful singular moment in time, not meant to be repeated or built upon. It was a secret she held close, a small, warm ember in the cold emptiness of her marriage. She had gotten pregnant a few weeks later. She had done the math, of course, but Julian had returned from his trip, and they had shared a brief, perfunctory reunion. The timing made it possible just barely that the child was his. Believing in her marriage, in her vows, she had pushed the memory of Caspian away and accepted the most logical conclusion. The baby was a Thorne. But now, sitting in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, Julian's poison had seeped into her certainty. His eagerness to deny the child, to cast her aside, recontextualized everything. The doubt, once a tiny seed, began to sprout its roots, twisting around her heart. Was it possible? Could the one night of genuine warmth she'd experienced in years be the very thing that would define the rest of her life? The question was too terrifying to face, but too powerful to ignore. The doubt festered. It was a constant gnawing presence that overshadowed the joy she tried to feel for the life growing inside her. Julian's accusation, intended as a weapon of shame, had become a beacon of terrifying possibility. Serena knew she couldn't live in the suffocating ambiguity. She needed the truth for her own sanity and for the future of her child. With shaking hands and a heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope, she used a small portion of her dwindling funds to schedule a non-invasive prenatal paternity test. The process was discreet and clinical, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos raging within her. The week she waited for the results was the longest of her life. Every possible outcome played out in her mind. If the baby was Julian's, she would have to live with the knowledge that its father was a monster who had tried to disown it. If it wasn't, the implications were too vast, too life-altering to fully comprehend. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. For an hour she stared at the unopened message, the subject line, "Your results are ready," seeming to pulse on the screen. Finally, with a deep breath that did little to calm her, she clicked it open, downloaded the attached PDF, and entered her case number. The words on the screen were stark, scientific, and absolute. Probability of paternity: Julian Thorne, 0%. Serena stared, her mind refusing to process the information. 0%. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty. The baby, her baby, was not Julian's. A wave of emotions crashed over her shock terror, and then unexpectedly a profound, liberating relief. A bond to Julian she thought was unbreakable had just been definitively severed. This child was hers, and hers alone, untainted by the Thorne name and its legacy of cruelty. This child was Caspian's, the name echoed in her thoughts. Caspian, the kind, soulful man from the art gallery, the father of her child. What was she supposed to do? He was a reclusive, intensely private man. He hadn't even given her his last name. How could she possibly find him? And what if she did? Would he believe her? Would he think she was some gold-digging opportunist? A one-night stand, trying to cash in. The fear of that rejection was paralyzing. She decided for now to do nothing. The knowledge was her own. She would protect her baby, and she would protect herself. The truth had set her free, not to run to another man, but to stand on her own 2 feet. This newfound resolve ignited a spark within her. The self-pity that had clouded her days began to dissipate, replaced by a quiet, fierce determination. She was a Sterling by birth, a graduate of Vassar with a degree in art history. She was more than just Julian Thorne's discarded wife. She started small. She crafted a resume that downplayed the last few years of socialite life and highlighted her academic achievements and internship at Sotheby's. She pounded the pavement, walking into dozens of art galleries in Chelsea and Soho. Most dismissed her out of hand, but one, a small independent gallery called Canvas and Chroma, owned by a sharp, discerning woman named Maria, saw something in her. Maria didn't care about her last name. She cared about her passion and knowledge. The job was a humbling start. She was an assistant doing everything from answering phones and cataloguing inventory to serving cheap wine at gallery openings. The pay was meager, but it was hers. Every dollar she earned was a victory, a brick in the foundation of her new life. For the first time, she wasn't living on an allowance from her father or a credit card from her husband. She was providing for herself and her child. Her pregnancy progressed. Her belly swelled, a beautiful, constant reminder of her purpose. Her colleagues at the gallery, a small, eclectic group of artists and art lovers, became her found family. They didn't know her story, and they didn't ask. They brought her food when she was too tired to cook, celebrated her small successes, and argued passionately with her about the merits of postmodernism. They saw her as Serena, the smart, hard-working woman with a keen eye for talent, not Serena Thorne, the fallen socialite. One evening, as she was closing the gallery, Maria found her staring at a new painting, a chaotic but beautiful abstract piece. "You have a good eye, you know," Maria said, her voice warm. "You've brought a new energy to this place." Tears welled in Serena's eyes, tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Maria, for giving me a chance." "Nonsense," Maria said with a wave of her hand. "You earned it." She looked at Serena's pronounced stomach. "You're going to be a great mum. You're a fighter." Walking home that night through the vibrant streets of Brooklyn, Serena felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. Her life was small. It was a struggle, but it was authentic. It was real. She had her work, her friends, and the precious secret she carried within her. She was building a new world, one canvas, one paycheck, one day at a time. And in this new world, she was finally truly free. The New York winter gave way to a hesitant spring, the city slowly shedding its grey coat for the tender green of new beginnings. Serena's pregnancy entered its final heavy stage. Her days at the gallery were long, her feet ached, but her spirit remained resilient. She had carved out a life for herself, a small but sturdy existence that was entirely her own. She had even managed to save a little money, tucking it away for the baby's arrival. Meanwhile, the city's society pages, which she now avoided, like the plague, were filled with Julian and Seraphina. Thorne Industries had successfully completed its hostile takeover of Omnicorp, making Julian more powerful than ever. He and Seraphina were the new undisputed king and queen of the city's social scene, their faces plastered across magazines, their every lavish party documented in excruciating detail. They were building an empire on the ashes of Serena's life, seemingly without a single backward glance. The sting of it was still there, but it was a dull ache now, not the searing wound it had once been. Her focus was forward on the future she held in her arms every night. The first contraction hit her in the middle of the night. It was a sharp, intense clench that stole her breath. She was alone. There was no husband to time the contractions, No best friend to drive her to the hospital. There was only her, the quiet ticking of the clock, and the city's distant hum. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat, but she beat it back. She had come this far alone. She could do this alone. She methodically went through the plan she had rehearsed 100 times. She called a car service, grabbed the hospital bag she had packed weeks ago, and locked the door to her small apartment behind her. The labor was long and grueling. The sterile, impersonal environment of the public hospital was a universe away from the private luxury suite Julian had booked for her months ago. Here there were no private nurses or gourmet meals, only the harried but competent staff and the shared chorus of pain and hope from the other women in the ward. Through the haze of exhaustion and agony, Serena focused on the one thing that mattered: her son. After 18 hours, he finally arrived. A messy, screaming, beautiful baby boy. They laid him on her chest, his tiny, wrinkled body warm against her skin, and the world fell away. All the pain, the betrayal, the struggle, it all dissolved in the overwhelming primal force of her love for this child. He had his mother's eyes, but there was something in the determined set of his brow, a quiet intensity that reminded her so viscerally of Caspian. She named him Leo. A lion. For the strength she hoped he would have, and for the strength he had already given her. Holding Leo in the quiet of the hospital room a day later, the full weight of her responsibility settled upon her. She had the truth of his paternity, but was it fair to keep it from Caspian forever? More importantly, was it fair to Leo? Her son deserved to know his heritage, to have access to his family's medical history. He deserved more than the fractured half-life she could offer him. She wasn't seeking a handout or a rescue. She had proven to herself that she didn't need one. But this wasn't about her anymore. It was about her son. Her search for Caspian had been a quiet background project for months. The lack of a last name made it almost impossible. But she remembered him mentioning a specific rare sculpture he had been trying to acquire from a private collection in Geneva. Cross-referencing the charity's donor list from that night, with known collectors of that artist, she had finally found him. Caspian Hawthorne. The name hit her like a physical force. Caspian Hawthorne wasn't just a wealthy art collector. He was the founder and CEO of Hawthorne Global, a legendary and intensely private multinational conglomerate with interests in everything from renewable energy to biomedical technology. He was a titan of industry, a kingmaker whose influence dwarfed Julian's 1,000 times over. He was a ghost, a myth in the business world, rarely photographed, never interviewed. Her decision solidified. Swallowing her fear, she made the most important phone call of her life. She didn't call him directly. Instead, she contacted the office of his chief legal counsel, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, whose name was synonymous with discretion and power. In a calm, steady voice, Serena stated her name and explained her reason for calling. She didn't make demands. She didn't issue threats. She simply stated the facts offered to provide the results of the legally certified prenatal paternity test, and made a simple request that Mr. Hawthorne be made aware that he has a son for the child's sake. She ended the call and looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. She had no idea what would happen next. The ball was in his court. She had done her part. She had done what was right for Leo. Whatever the consequences, she would face them, just as she had faced everything else, with her head held high and her son held close. Caspian Hawthorne sat in his soundproofed office on the top floor of the Hawthorne Global Building, a sleek, minimalist spire that pierced the Manhattan skyline. The city unfolded beneath him, a toy set of ambition and commerce, but he paid it no mind. He was staring at a single-page memo on his desk, the words typed in the precise, no-nonsense font of his chief counsel, Evelyn Reed. He had built an empire on logic, on data, on the cold, hard calculus of risk and reward. He had tamed markets, advised presidents, and moved billions of dollars with the quiet flick of a pen. But the words on this page defied all logic. They belonged to a world he had long since locked away, a world of emotion, of connection, of a single unforgettable night with a sad-eyed woman named Serena. Subject paternity claim. Claimant Serena Sterling, formerly Thorne. Allegation claimant asserts her newborn son, Leo Sterling, is your biological child. Evidence certified prenatal DNA test submitted. Results conclusive. Recommendation: authorize our team to conduct a secondary independent DNA verification. He had never forgotten her. In a life filled with calculated interactions and sycophantic acquaintances, her authenticity had been a beacon. He had followed her story from a distance, noting her marriage to the brash, arrogant Julian Thorne with a strange pang of disappointment. He'd read of their recent messy divorce, the public narrative painting her as an unstable gold digger. He hadn't believed it for a second. It didn't align with the woman who had spoken so passionately about Rilke's poetry. A son. The word felt foreign, monumental. His wife Isabel had died a decade ago, their dreams of a family dying with her. He had accepted a life of solitude, pouring his energy into his work and his art collection. The possibility of fatherhood was a door he had long considered permanently closed. And now this. Evelyn Reed's recommendation was logical. Standard procedure. But Caspian's instincts, the very instincts that had built his empire, screamed at him. This was not a situation for lawyers and protocols. This was personal. "Cancel my afternoon," he said into his intercom, his voice calm and steady, "and get me the address on this file." An hour later, Caspian Hawthorne's discreet black sedan pulled up outside a slightly weathered brownstone in Brooklyn. He stepped out his tailored suit, looking out of place amidst the graffiti and overflowing flower boxes. He dismissed his driver and walked up the 2 flights of stairs himself, his heart for the first time in years beating with an unfamiliar rhythm of apprehension and hope. He knocked on the door of apartment 2B. Serena opened it, her face pale with exhaustion, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was wearing a plain t-shirt and sweatpants. She was more beautiful than he remembered. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him, her hand instinctively going to the small bundle she held in her arms. "Caspian?" She whispered his name, a breath of disbelief. "Hello, Serena," he said, his voice softer than he intended. His eyes were immediately drawn to the baby. "May I?" She hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping back to let him in. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, but clean and filled with a surprising amount of light. It was a home, not a showroom. He walked toward her, his gaze locked on the child. Leo was awake, his dark, intelligent eyes staring up with a serious, curious expression. Caspian felt a connection so immediate, so powerful, it nearly buckled his knees. He saw his own father's eyes, his own determined brow. He didn't need a DNA test. He knew. This was his son. "He's perfect, Caspian," said his voice, thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in a decade. "I didn't want anything from you," Serena said, quickly defensively. "I just thought you should know, and that he should have his medical history." Caspian finally looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the fierce pride and the deep vulnerability in her eyes. He saw the strength it had taken for her to survive, to rebuild, to make that call. She wasn't a gold digger. She was a lioness protecting her cub. "I believe you," he said simply. "Thank you for telling me." He reached out not for the baby, but to gently touch Serena's arm. You've been through an ordeal. You and our son. That ends now." His response was not what she had prepared for. There was no suspicion, no negotiation, no army of lawyers. There was only acceptance, kindness, and a quiet, unshakable authority. Over the next few days, Caspian didn't just offer support, he provided a fortress. He didn't ask Serena to move in with him. Instead, he had one of his private, unlisted residences, a magnificent, fully staffed brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street in Gramercy Park, prepared for her and Leo. It offered privacy, security, and space, but it was a home, not a palace. He arranged for a discreet, round-the-clock security detail, a live-in pediatric nurse, and a personal chef. He gave her complete control, presenting everything as an offering, not a command. "This is for Leo's safety and your comfort," he explained. "Accept what you need, refuse what you don't. The only thing I insist on is being a part of my son's life." He came every day. He didn't intrude. He simply spent time. He would sit for hours holding Leo, his large, capable hands, looking impossibly gentle as they cradled his tiny son. He and Serena talked, picking up their conversation from that night in the gallery, as if no time had passed. She found herself telling him everything about Julian, about Seraphina, about her struggle and her small victories. He listened, his empathy and quiet anger on her behalf, a soothing balm on her still raw wounds. One evening, as he was about to leave, he turned to her. Julian Thorne publicly questioned this child's paternity. He said, his voice dangerously soft. He tried to erase his own son, and in doing so he insulted mine. That is something I cannot allow to stand. A chill went down Serena's spine. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The quiet, gentle art lover was gone. In his place stood Caspian Hawthorne, the silent king of the global economy. A lion had awoken, and he was about to defend his pride. The rarefied air of New York's upper echelon is a delicate ecosystem, sustained by whispers and speculation. The first tremor was almost imperceptible. A rumor started circulating at a private dinner party in the Hamptons that Serena Thorne, the disgraced ex-wife, hadn't vanished into obscurity as everyone assumed. She had resurfaced, living in an unlisted Gramercy Park residence known to be owned by the Hawthorne Global Portfolio. Julian Thorne heard the whispers and laughed them off. She probably seduced the property manager, he sneered to Seraphina over breakfast in their penthouse. "She's desperate. It's pathetic." Seraphina, polishing a new diamond bracelet, agreed, but a flicker of unease crossed her face. Caspian Hawthorne's name, even in passing, commanded a certain gravity. The second tremor was more significant. Julian was in the final stages of a complex financing deal for his newly expanded company, a deal that would solidify his position as an industry titan. The lead investor was a notoriously conservative Swiss banking consortium, Henri Renaud Oncio. Days before the papers were to be signed, the consortium abruptly pulled out, citing a sudden re-evaluation of market volatility. No further explanation was given. The deal worth billions collapsed overnight. Julian was furious, scrambling to understand what had happened. His calls to the bank's president, a man he had golfed with in Geneva, went unreturned. Then the full-blown earthquake hit. It came in the form of a short, dry press release from the office of Caspian Hawthorne, a man who hadn't issued a public statement in 5 years. The release was sent to a handful of top-tier financial news outlets and was devastating in its simplicity. It announced the birth of his son and heir, Leo Hawthorne, and named the boy's mother, Ms. Serena Sterling. The news detonated in the worlds of finance and society with the force of a nuclear bomb. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Serena hadn't seduced a property manager. She was the mother of the sole heir to the Hawthorne fortune, a fortune that made Julian Thorne's millions look like pocket change. Caspian Hawthorne wasn't just rich. He was powerful in a way Julian could only dream of. He didn't just own companies, he owned the banks that funded them and the politicians that regulated them. Julian stared at the article on his screen, his face ashen. The name Leo struck him like a physical blow. That was the name Serena had wanted for their son. He had mocked it as being too common. Now that name was attached to a dynasty. His world began to unravel with breathtaking speed. The Swiss bankers who had abandoned him, their largest private client, was Hawthorne Global. A lucrative government contract Thorne Industries had been poised to win was suddenly awarded to a competitor with deep ties to Hawthorne's renewable energy sector. Major shareholders spooked by the collapse of the financing deal, and the clear signal that Julian had made a powerful enemy began to sell off their stock. The company's value plummeted. The social fallout was just as brutal. Invitations to exclusive events dried up. Friends who had once clamored for his attention now crossed the street to avoid him. He had built his life on the perception of power, and now that the perception was shattered, he had nothing. The pressure cooker of the penthouse became unbearable. Seraphina, who had hitched her wagon to Julian's rising star, now saw it plummeting back to earth. Her dream of becoming the city's reigning queen was turning to dust. "How could you be so stupid?" she shrieked at him one evening, her voice raw with panic as she stared at the falling stock ticker. "You threw her out for me. You were supposed to be the smart one, the winner. How was I supposed to know she'd slept with Caspian, bloody Hawthorne?" Julian roared back, his composure finally cracking. He hurled a crystal glass against the wall where it shattered, much like his life. "You didn't just divorce her, Julian. You humiliated her." Seraphina's eyes were wild. "You called her a liar and cast doubt on her baby. You didn't just anger a woman. You insulted the mother of a billionaire's heir. The one man in the world you can't afford to cross. Their great love story, forged in betrayal, couldn't withstand the pressure of failure. The foundation of their relationship wasn't love. It was a mutual hunger for status and power. With those things evaporating, all that was left were bitter accusations and curdled ambition. Seraphina saw her future vanishing. She had played her hand and lost spectacularly. She packed her bags that night. "I'm not going down with you." She spat her face a mask of contempt. "You're a sinking ship, Julian, and I was never a good swimmer." She left him there alone, in the silent penthouse, surrounded by the opulent trapping of a life he had stolen, a life that was now being systematically dismantled. He had believed himself to be a king, but he had made an enemy of a god, and the retribution was only just beginning. Julian Thorne was a cornered animal. His company was in a death spiral. His social standing was obliterated, and the woman he had betrayed his wife for had abandoned him at the first sign of trouble. Humiliation gnawed at him, a festering wound to his colossal ego. In his narcissistic mind, he was the victim. Serena had deceived him. She had cheated, and now she was being rewarded for it. He couldn't accept his downfall. He had to regain control of the narrative. In a move of breathtaking desperation, he decided to fight back in the only arena he had left, the court of public opinion. He gave an exclusive interview to a notorious tabloid journalist, spinning a pathetic, self-serving tale. He painted himself as the heartbroken husband, deeply in love with his pregnant wife, only to be devastated by her infidelity. "I was blinded by love," he said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion as the cameras rolled. "I wanted to believe the child was mine. I would have raised him as my own. My son. He emphasized the words, trying to plant a seed of doubt to reclaim some paternal connection to the Hawthorne heir. He depicted Serena as a manipulative schemer who had trapped him and Caspian Hawthorne as the shadowy interloper who had destroyed his marriage. He even hinted at a lawsuit to contest paternity, a last-ditch effort to claw his way back to relevance. The interview was a sensation, splashing his face across every gossip site and television screen. For a moment, a sliver of the public was swayed by his performance. In the quiet library of the Gramercy Park brownstone, Serena watched the interview with Caspian at her side, Leo sleeping peacefully in his bassinet nearby. The sight of Julian's false tears and sanctimonious lies made her stomach clench. "He will never stop," she whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. Caspian muted the television. He turned to her, his expression calm, but his eyes as hard as granite. "People like Julian Thorne believe their own lies," he said. "They construct a reality where they are always the hero. But reality has a way of asserting itself. He wanted a public battle. He will get one. But it will be on my terms, and it will be the last one he ever fights." Caspian Hawthorne's response was not an angry rebuttal or a competing interview. It was a clinical, devastatingly precise counter-offensive. The next morning, a single unified story appeared on the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, authored by their most respected investigative journalists. It wasn't a gossip piece. It was a detailed financial exposé. The article began with a quiet official statement from Hawthorne Global's legal counsel, confirming Mr. Hawthorne's paternity of Leo Hawthorne, and including the results of a new court-admissible DNA test, showing a 99.999% probability. It then systematically dismantled Julian's claims. It included a timeline of his business trips, which correlated perfectly with the timeline of Leo's conception, proving he was out of the country. But that was just the beginning. The core of the article was a deep dive into the finances of the Thorne Omnicorp merger. Using leaked documents and anonymous but high-level sources, the journalists uncovered a pattern of securities fraud, insider trading, and financial malfeasance, orchestrated by Julian himself. He had deliberately manipulated stock prices and used shell corporations to hide assets and evade taxes. He had built his empire not just on ambition, but on a mountain of crime. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. By noon, the SEC had announced a formal investigation into Thorne Industries. By 3 o'clock, federal agents were raiding his Park Avenue office, carrying out boxes of documents. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to oust him as CEO. His assets were frozen. He was facing a litany of federal charges that would likely send him to prison for decades. His ruin was complete. He had lost his company, his fortune, his freedom, and the last shred of his reputation. Seraphina Vance fared no better. Implicated in the financial scandal as a board member who had profited from the insider trading, she was also named in the investigation. Cast out of the society she had fought so desperately to conquer, she became a pariah, her name synonymous with greed and betrayal. The doors that had once opened for her were now slammed shut in her face. Weeks later, Serena stood on the terrace of the Hawthorne estate, a sprawling, beautiful property in upstate New York, overlooking the Hudson River. The autumn leaves were a riot of gold and crimson. Leo, healthy and giggling, was in Caspian's arms, his small hand wrapped around his father's finger. Caspian looked at Serena, his eyes filled with a warmth and admiration that made her feel truly seen. Their relationship had blossomed, growing from a shared love for their son into a deep, respectful, and genuine affection for one another. They were a family forged not by contract or convenience, but by an unexpected twist of fate and a foundation of truth. She looked out at the vast, peaceful landscape. The noise and glitter of her old life felt like a distant, half-remembered dream. She had been betrayed and broken, left with nothing. But from those ashes, she had found everything that truly mattered: her own strength, her beautiful son, and a man who loved her for exactly who she was. She was not Mrs. Thorne, the millionaire's wife, or even Miss Sterling, the mother of the billionaire's heir. She was Serena, a survivor, a mother, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but stronger and more radiant than before. And so Serena's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead to the most unexpected and beautiful destinations. Julian and Seraphina, who built their world on a foundation of lies, saw it all crumble into dust, a fitting end delivered by the quiet justice of karma. Serena, who lost a gilded cage, found true freedom and a love more valuable than any fortune. She proved that a person's worth is not defined by their last name or their bank account, but by their resilience, their integrity, and their capacity to love. Her journey from ruin to redemption shows us that even in our darkest moments, a new beginning is waiting, and true power lies not in what you have, but in who you are. If this story of justice and vindication resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story. What did you think of Julian's downfall? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.